Members, we'll make a start then. Our substantive business for today, we have a briefing from the Northern Ireland Community Relations Council, who are briefing the committee on the third annual Peace Monitoring Report. We then have a briefing by NILGA on European issues, and we will then be considering sections of the draft bill for the NI Public Services Ombudsman. We have apologies from Chairperson Mike Nesbitt, Megan Fearon and Brenda Hale. Do we have any other apologies, members? No. Any other expected late arrivals? Alex on his way. Okay, no problem. Agenda item 2 then is Chairperson's business. At page 5 of your pack is a request from the Northern Ireland Assembly Business Trust that the chair of the committee make a short address to the Business Trust on the committee's engagement in European issues. It's scheduled to take place on Tuesday the 13th of May. Are members content that the chair make some remarks on the work of our committee in relation to European issues? Agreed. Can advise Mike accordingly. He's got a diary commitment to add there. Okay, the next item then is committee invitations. At page 6 is a copy of the committee's current invitations. Members content to note? Agreed. Okay. Agenda item 3 is draft minutes of our meeting of the 2nd of April 2014. There's a copy of the minutes at page 8 of your pack. Are members content to agree the draft minutes?
Content, yeah.
Agreed. Okay. Matters arising then. At page 14 of your pack is a response from the department providing further information on its outstanding post-project evaluations. Members have any comments or content to note? Content? Okay.
Yeah.
Then at page 16 of your pack is a response from the Minister for Health to the committee's report on the Delivering Social Change Signature Programmes event. The Minister provides further information on the 2 signature programmes that his department is responsible for and some points of clarification. Members content to note? Okay. We're on then to the list of outstanding correspondence. At page 23 in your pack is a list of outstanding correspondence. Members have any comment? The list does seem to be reducing. We're making progress, I think.
Dwindling.
Any updates, Clerk, or be enough for us to note?
Yeah, we've expedited most of the items again, so.
Thanks very much for the work done in that regard. Members content to note?
Content.
Okay. Agenda item 5 then, correspondence. At page 26 of your pack is correspondence from the Committee for Enterprise, proposing a joint plenary debate with this committee, the Committee for Enterprise and the Committee for Finance on renewable energy in public buildings. We've included copies of correspondence and a copy of a research paper on renewable energy development in the public sector. Members have any comments or content that the chair meet with the chair of the other committees to discuss how to take that forward?
Very content.
Yep.
Content that the chair meets with the other committees and comes back to us before final decision.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, noted. At page 45 of your pack is a response from the department to the Committee for Enterprise in relation to discussions with the Chief Executive of the Royal Bank of Scotland and the Chief Executive of the Ulster Bank. Members content to note or any comments? Content? Okay. Okay then, the House of Lords EU Committee. At page 46 of your pack is a letter from the Chair of the House of Lords EU Committee advising that it has concluded its inquiry into the role of national parliaments in the European Union, and there is a summary of the report included in your pack for you to note. Members content to note?
Agreed.
Okay. At page 50 of your pack then is a copy of OFMDFM's Investing Activity Report for March. Members content to note?
Yep.
Okay, then on to tabled items. At page 3 of your table pack is a response from the department advising that ministers have completed their consideration of the PAYDU report recommendations, including the formalisation of the role of local government in civil contingency planning matters, including consideration of establishing civil contingencies preparedness groups outside of Belfast. The response provides some good detail on the arrangements put in place by the executive. Do members have any comments? Content to note. I recall, I think I had requested some of this information, and it has been quite a while coming forward, but the department and the executive have obviously done quite a bit of work in relation to it. The Red Cross in particular had strong view that there should be civil contingencies legislation put in place that required a statutory duty on civil contingencies planning. Would members be content to support a request that a relevant senior official from the department come and speak to the report that has been written further to the recommendations of the PEGI report?
That would be very
okay,
useful.
Great. Happy to action that, Clerk. Yep, that's great.
Sure, that's been broken down by policing districts.
Has it? Okay.
As opposed to
Councils, right.
Yeah.
I think that's the sort of detail would be helpful to get the officials here to speak to us on. Yeah, yeah. Why they've selected that particular way of doing things. Okay. If we could try and get that sooner rather than later as well, that'd be great. Okay then, the Fund for European Aid to the Most Deprived. At page 8 of your pack is a response from the department to the committee's request for comment on the proposal for a fund for European aid for the most deprived. The response advises that it's for the government at Westminster to comment, and therefore ministers don't have a policy view on the merits of the proposal. Do members have any comments in relation to that? Content to note and bring back if there's any issues. Okay. Okay then, members, on to agenda item 6, correct, Clerk? The first substantive briefing for today, we have the Community Relations Council Peace Monitoring Report. It's the third annual Peace Monitoring Report, which aims to monitor the Northern Ireland peace process year on year by use of an indicator framework. The report is written by Dr. Paul Nolan and produced jointly by the Community Relations Council, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation and the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust. At page 54 of your packs is a clerk's brief highlighting 10 key points raised by the report, and at page 58 of your packs is a briefing note from the Community Relations Council and a copy of the report at page 63. Can I welcome to the committee then today Mr. Peter Osborne, the chairperson of the Community Relations Council, Ms. Jacqueline Irwin, the Chief Executive of the Community Relations Council, and Dr. Paul Nolan, the Research Director on the report. You're very welcome indeed. Do you want to start by making some opening remarks to the committee? Thank you.
Chair, please. Thank you very much for the welcome, for your time, to yourself and to the other members of the committee. We very much appreciate it. I'm going to say, if I can, just a couple of words around the context of the report and touch on TBUC just for a minute or two. Paul is then going to discuss very much more the substance of it, and Jacqueline may pick up on some issues around coming out of that in terms of the work of the Community Relations Council. I just want to say to the committee, first of all, contrary to any other impression you may have, that certainly myself and the Community Relations Council have had really very little involvement to date in discussing legislation around TBUC and a new Equality and Good Relations Commission. For myself, there's been one meeting of a transition board about 3 weeks ago. It did not touch on the legislation. It touched on its terms of reference and a few other technical matters. It's certainly something that we would want to be discussing very thoroughly with the department in terms of how to shape that legislation, but we haven't had that opportunity to date in any real sense, but it's something that we would want to do in the future. I want to just make the committee aware that the two organisations involved, the Community Relations Council and the Equality Commission, are embracing the potential new commission. We have set up a working group between the boards of both organisations that has met 3 times so far, and I think we're due to meet officials of the department for the first time next month in early May to talk about what the 2 boards believe should be going into the draft legislation. There are a number of principles the 2 boards have agreed so far. Those principles include there should be long-term commitment from government to support equality and good relations work given the ongoing needs within the community. Secondly, that there should be adequate resourcing to deliver good relations and equality development work regardless of the resourcing provided by or for the new Commission. Third, that good relations and equality functions need enhanced and there should be no reduction of them in practice. Also, that the duties and functions of a new Commission should reflect standards set down in international law for equality and good relations. There should be a definition, fifthly, of good relations and sectarianism within the remit of racism or ambit of racism that equates to international standards, and that there should finally be effective enforcement methods including legal and financial and other monitoring and regulation potential. The two boards believe those principles are extremely important when we look at this new legislation. On top of that, I suppose the Community Relations Council certainly would say that it's more than desirable, as currently within Section 75, more than desirable to promote good relations and reconciliation in this society. It's a fundamental need, and we need to enhance the recognition of that need. And any system that is augmented, that in any way allows good relations to get in the way of equality or vice versa, is not something that we would support either. In a general sense around TBUC, and briefly, the strategy is limited in some ways, but it's ambitious in others, such as the removal of interface barriers. And the 2 points, just for the record, we'd make around that is that any ambitious or other target needs to be adequately resourced in the medium to long term, and we are aware of some issues in the short term around funding and resources being made available as quickly as they should be. So, in essence, some of the critical points are around resourcing, are around the parameters of the duties and functions of a new Commission, the definitions that need to be to international standards, and the need for more robust monitoring and a regulatory framework, and ensuring that equality and good relations are both enhanced around the legislation. I think those needs are very clearly reflected in the Peace Monitoring Report. And that maybe allows me, in the context of some of those needs, to turn to Paul and ask Paul if he would give you a brief summary of what the Peace Monitoring Report actually says.
Good. Thank you very much, Peter. Chair, can I just seek your guidance, first of all, as to how much time I have here, because this is a very long report, and I could go on for a very long time, but I suspect you don't want that.
No. I think it's an extremely important report as well, Paul, so we're keen to give you as best an opportunity to draw out the key findings that you've made, so take reasonable time to go through those key points.
Okay. Well, I noticed some of you do seem to have the hard copy publication. We'd left these up during the week. Has everyone got this? I hope so. And with that, there should also have been the summary version with the 10 key points. So, great. I'll just start with some of those, and then could I invite people to interrupt me and challenge me, ask questions, queries, whatever, as we go along. I'll start perhaps with the one that got a bit of media attention last week, which was the one about educational underachievement. And I was looking at the attainment gaps in Northern Ireland. I used what is, I think, the standard measure, which is the attainment of 5 good GCSEs. That is A to C, including English and Maths. And what you see when you look at that is that you know, overall, the picture in Northern Ireland is reasonably good when you look at it in terms of averages. Not perhaps as good as we sometimes like to imagine, but the real problems start when you start, you know, going underneath those averages to see where the gaps are. And the inequality gaps are really pretty extreme in that if you look, first of all, at those who are doing best in the current system, you find that the pupils who do best are Catholic girls not in receipt of free school meals, i.e. not socially disadvantaged. And those who are doing least well are Protestant boys who are in receipt of free school meals. Now, whether or not free school meals is a good indicator of social deprivation is a matter itself for debate, but it's the only one we've got at the moment, so it's the one that I've used. And when I look at that, what we find is that the very bottom of the table, we find Protestant boys with 19.7% achieving at that level. How big is that gap? Well, the gap is actually 57 percentage points. That's a huge gap. And I wanted just to try to get a measure of that, because while 57 percentage points sounds like a lot, well, how big is it actually? You need to measure it against something. And so what I did was I looked at it in comparison with attainment gaps across the water between the different social groups, and found that it really is a pretty astonishing gap, in that if you look at the position of Catholic girls, and bear in mind, incidentally, that this is a very imprecise measure because it draws from two different data sets, but I think the core reality is pretty clear, that Catholic girls who are not socially disadvantaged do perform quite remarkably well when compared against pupils across the water, i.e. They come out somewhere close to the top. The social group that performs best in England are Chinese pupils, and Catholic girls actually outperform them and are only pipped at the top by Chinese girls, actually. And the performance of Protestant boys is right down there at the bottom. And the year that I looked at, it was somewhere below white boys on free school meals and only just above Roma and Irish travellers. So this is a pretty shocking result, I think. And the worrying thing in terms of looking at our peace process in Northern Ireland, or public order, is if you have a situation where 4 out of 5 are leaving school without the basic employability qualification, that does not augur well for the future of, well, those boys in particular, the communities they come from, or the society in general. And so I looked at it then in terms of, well, what's happening with youth unemployment? And this year, in the Labour Force survey, in the religion report, for the first time, the percentage of Protestant boys being unemployed is higher than that for Catholics. And you can see this working its way through the labour market then. I mean, you know, I've traced all of this in terms of the numbers applying for jobs, the numbers actually being given jobs, and you see that there has been a significant improvement, advance, if you like, and this is a long-term thing for the Catholic population, and it has served to unsettle unionism, in that if you see this as a zero-sum equation, then again, for one is a loss for others. I don't see it that way myself, but I understand that it has served to have that effect. And I should emphasise that when you look at this in terms of percentages, that's not the only reality, because if we say that Protestant boys are the ones who have the lowest level in percentage terms, that's not the same as saying that the greatest number of people leaving school without that qualification are from a Protestant background, because in that age cohort there are in fact more Catholic boys. So if you look at it in terms of raw numbers, the number of Catholic boys leaving school without that basic qualification was about 1,500 as against 850 Protestant boys, so significantly more, almost double. And it's fair to say that when you look at the kind of disadvantages that are created by that in terms of accessing the labour market and in terms of social exclusion, this is actually impacting on both communities. But I think at this stage you would have to have a particular concern for what's happening in communities of Protestant social disadvantage, particularly in relation to young males. So I'll pause there, shall I, Chair, just to allow a little bit of discussion of that point.
It's obviously one of the most stark findings in relation to the report. I'm keen to make sure we have a degree of structure to the conversation as well, and there's obviously 10 key points there. Do members have questions or comments at this stage, or is it possible maybe in the the 5 to 10 minute period that you have in terms of briefing to factor some brief comments in relation to those 10 key points on the whole, and then for us to come back? Would that be possible? You maybe at the start you could just exactly what the report is and the purpose of it as well. And is that okay? That would be helpful. Members content with that approach? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so let's continue on. Well, essentially, to go back to the purpose of the report, it is to provide a sort of X-ray of the society to see where the problems might occur. And where we have problems with, for example, public order, as we've had in the past year, what we're trying to do here is try to see, well, what are the real roots of that? Where do the real problems occur? What is it we're seeing? And you can make this as a fairly safe generalisation that where you have inequalities and where you have unemployment, you have the potential for that kind of public disorder. It's not an inevitability. There are no iron laws in this, but certainly when you see youth unemployment going above 20%, you know that the dial has moved into the red and that you really do have to be a little bit concerned about that. When you see that there are community differentials and when you see that they're built on the historic fault line between the two communities, then you do have to be concerned. And what this report is saying is that we have a number of structural problems that relate to the economy, that relate to access to labour markets, and that, as it's put here, failure lies in wait for young working class Protestant males. To re-emphasise, it doesn't mean that young working class Catholic males are not also in danger of that form of social exclusion, but the types of problem we've seen over the past year do seem to show that the neuralgic point has been within loyalist areas. That's the area that has seemed to show the greatest sensitivity. The other points that I go on to make relating to that is to say, well, coming out of that public disorder, we have had an increase in polarisation. I wouldn't want to exaggerate that. I mean, if you look at things like, for example, indicators such as the numbers of those who were rehoused under the Housing Executive SPED scheme, i.e. through intimidation, there was an increase last year. I mean, quite a significant one in some ways, like from 300 to 400. And the Guardian newspaper made much of that. But actually, if you look at that in the longer term, we do get those fluctuations year on year. And in fact, last year, the total number was less than it was in 2005, less than it was in 2006. So I wouldn't want to make too much of that. There has been some evidence of harassment in the workplace. The Equality Commission are aware of cases that have been brought to their attention. But again, if you see that in the longer term perspective, it's nothing like the scale that we saw, say, at the beginning of the 1990s, at the time when flags and emblems were taken out of the workplace. And to turn that around and look at it perhaps in a more positive light, I think what we've seen is that, well, firstly, the whole flags protest didn't affect the workplace in any significant way. And I think that's because people in Northern Ireland have come to accept the value of neutral or mixed workplaces and don't want to see that threatened in any way. And so I present evidence here that the reconciliation impulse actually remains fairly strong. We would have been aware of that in the Community Relations Council because we're aware of the amount of cross-community traffic. And we're aware that there has been no diminution of that. There was some temporary suspension of particular networks during the flags dispute. But the news on that, I think, is more encouraging than the media would normally allow for. And the other positive, perhaps the main positive to emerge from last year, was the way in which the City of Culture in Derry, Londonderry, managed to kind of model almost what a post-conflict society might look like in its happiest form, i.e. we did have some quite remarkable exchanges there, the Apprentice Boys coming over, for example, to play their tunes in the Flagole, or the PSNI band being applauded as it came into Guildhall Square. These are the types of things that would have seemed unimaginable, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And so while overall the year has been fairly negative, there are significant positive points that I think we need to hold on to.
Okay, thank you. Maybe if we can draw out a couple of the key points and get some response from all of you today. Reviewing the report, which I think is very helpful indeed, make some general conclusions around the point that significant progress has been made on the levels of violence in Northern Ireland, but yet the society remains deeply divided. with fault lines through education, housing and other aspects of daily existence. In particular, I'd be keen to see how you think I realise this is a state of the community report, not necessarily with recommendations, but I'd be keen to see if you think government response to those issues is adequate, or if you have any suggestions for how that might be better done. The main community relations strategy is obviously towards building a united community. Made some opening comments in relation to that. In its current format, with the current design that is happening, is it an adequate strategy to respond to the types of ongoing issues that have been identified by the Peace Monitoring Report? Any of you capable of responding to that?
Well, you start and I want to add in. I think you go ahead, John.
Thank you, Chair. Well, Paul has given a summary of the environment in which the United Communities policy response is trying to sit. And in one way, the simple answer to your question is it's too early to tell, because so much is still awaited in relation to that policy. One thing, though, I think that I would draw attention to at this point in time is the collision of other issues that are likely to impact on the community relations response in the short and medium term. We're about to face into a couple of years of very significant change at local authority level, and local authorities are viewed as being a very important delivery mechanism for a lot of the local support for community relations and peace building activity. We also know, that there is a falling away of the level of international support, that financial support that we would have had in the past from international funders, valuable as that has been in the past, and we do await the outcome of the review of community relations funding, which is one of the tasks to be undertaken under the United Communities strategy. So we are certainly getting reports from across the region of concern about the uncertainty that there is in the short and medium term for a lot of the very vital work that goes on at local community level. So while to be charitable to the policy, there are many issues in there that are very familiar to community relations practitioners, particularly in relation to young people and work in the summertime. Some of those sorts of initiatives have been available for the better part of over 20 years in some cases. The issue in relation to United Communities is the sheer scale that is anticipated in the policy, and we do await the impact of that, and measuring the impact of that I think will be a very important thing, and I know committee members will be familiar with that as well. But in the very immediate term, the uncertainty about the support for day-to-day existing peace building and good relations work is the issue that we're hearing most frequently when we speak to groups at the ground level.
May I add a couple of other comments on it, and in one or two occasions, if I may, Chair, just be a little bit blunt about aspects of it. I think it is very positive that the TBUC strategy was produced. I think there are parts of it that are good. There are parts of it where it is extremely limited. And I think we and the society here deserves more than those parts that are limited. There are parts where the ambition is really very clear and certainly not limited, such as the removal of interface barriers within 10 years. I think that's a potential outcome that all of us around the table would support. I would have some reservations about the time frame, but let's be blunt about it. Those barriers will not be removed in 10 years unless there is adequate resourcing identified and committed to doing the work that needs to be done. In the short term, over the next 2 or 3 years, there is funding. IFI and peace monies, I'm sure, will be committed to it. The short-term measures over those few years will be making those interfaces look more environmentally attractive, and that's very positive. But the actual business of taking the barriers down will be done after incredibly hard, difficult, complex, challenging work that people will undertake at risk within communities, and that will be done from years 3, 4 onwards. I don't think any of us can identify where the resourcing is coming from during those years up to year 10 to make that policy a reality. And I think if you're going to develop a strategy with ambitious targets, you also need to be clear to the communities who are doing the work that you're going to resource the work, because that means you identify the need to take this seriously. I think also it's a time within the strategy with the legislation that we haven't seen yet and have little input into, if not none, that legislation takes the need for equality and good relations to another level. Again, I think we need to take this seriously, and therefore the legislation needs to reflect definitions around sectarianism to international standards. It needs to be more robust about the duties and functions of good relations and equality. It needs to add in more around regulation on equality and on good relations that is weak at the minute, or weaker than it should be at the minute. So there are things around the strategy that should be much more robust than they are. But at the end of the day, on the ground, those people doing the work need to know that they will be resourced. And apart from the longer term needs around resourcing, what I'm hearing, and I think I need to reflect this as an organisation that works with communities on the ground, is people saying they want to do work in a financial year and then not getting a decision about resourcing until close to the end of the financial year. Well, it's impossible to do this sort of work in that sort of time frame. This isn't work that can be done on a year-by-year basis on a minimal budget. This is work that needs resourced long-term with commitments given long-term.
Keen to draw out the funding issue, and there's some specifics there that I'll return to as well, but there seems to be a development theme there. As the body currently with statutory responsibility for policy advice and scrutiny, are the department, OFMDFM department, seeking your advice in terms of design and delivery and planning for the T-Buck strategy to an acceptable level?
The process at the minute, at least as we understand it, is that officials in the department are working in co-design processes with other departments. CRC is not involved in that process. We have supported officials in engagements with communities on some of the issues, for instance, in relation to interfaces and also in relation to young people, and we've been glad to do that and would be very happy to help in any other way that we can in relation to that. But beyond that, we're not directly involved in the initiatives as they are coming forward. I should just say that we have no statutory responsibility in this regard, just to correct in that. But you're right, in terms of the public policy up until this point, we would have been involved in providing information to government in relation to what would be best practice moving forward.
We would like to be more involved, if I can describe it in that way. But when you look specifically at the legislation, as I said, the two bodies around the Equality and Good Relations Commission, the Equality Commission and the Community Relations Council, have set up a working group of a joint working group to look at the legislation. We will have thoughts that we jointly think should go into that legislation. We'll be meeting the officials, I think, for the first time as a working group in a month in early May. So I think we would like to see more involvement in terms of potential for designing the legislation. I just want to be clear again, at a personal level, because I know it's been referred to in the committee. I think there was one transition board, the first one, that happened 3 weeks ago. I was at that. It discussed terms of reference. It did not discuss legislation, and we've had very little input into any potential legislation. Okay.
And how will the department take on board the report that's been created here? It's obviously based on quite a detailed indicator framework. Maybe you could say something about how the framework is developed. And maybe you could mention as well if there's an opportunity for OFMDFM to take on board these types of indicators, given their review of good relation indicators within the department at this moment in time as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, when we set up the project, Chair, we had to find a way to do it, basically, and that meant looking at indicator frameworks to see, well, how do you monitor peace? Because it's a very elusive concept in itself. And we broke it down into 4 constituent parts, the first one being equality, which seemed to be central to the Good Friday Agreement and to any notion of peace. We then decided we needed to look at cohesion and sharing. That would also be seen to be crucially important to building a stable society. We looked at political progress under a number of headings, and we didn't set any definition of what political progress might look like, i.e. it's not progress towards a particular constitutional goal like a United Ireland or greater integration with the UK or whatever. It's more seen in terms of the ability of the society to resolve its issues through a parliamentary forum and through reason and debate. And then the fourth is the sense of security, which is, if you like, the most basic, i.e. That's how most people understand whether or not they're living in a peaceful society, if they feel secure in their own beds, in their own homes, in their own neighbourhoods and in their own workplaces, and again in the public space. And so we look at all of those and try to find, well, what can we discover by looking at, for example, attitude surveys to see what people think. We look also at behaviours, we look at how people vote, we look at their participation in terms of cultural events, festivals, that type of thing. We look at the labour market to see what's happening there, and we look at patterns of housing, residential segregation where people choose to live. And we put all of those together and try to see the links between them, to try to see how, for example, changes in the labour market will affect changes in housing, how changes in housing can unsettle the public mood, how that can reflect in the statistics for public disorder and so on, and try to present a holistic analysis of the society year on year. So that's the approach we take.
I think those are 4 helpful themes to focus under. I think you've covered a fair amount of equality. It remains a significant issue on many of the grounds that you've set out. There's still significant issues in cohesion and sharing, and in terms of political progress, there's a few stark comments as well. The report says that a culture of endless negotiation has become embedded, and without a vision of a shared society to sustain it, the peace process has lost the power to inspire. Would you have any comments in relation to that particular finding of the report?
That's the comment, and I wonder if anyone might disagree with that. I mean, that would seem to be an expression of what would now seem to be the settled view from Washington, London, Dublin, and only yesterday a senior politician from within the Assembly was saying he was embarrassed by it. This is a regular kind of occurrence now to find someone saying they're embarrassed by the performance of the Assembly. What we're finding is that if you look at attitudes outside the Assembly, for example, the Belfast Telegraph survey published just yesterday of attitudes of young people, I think to say that the peace process has lost its power to inspire is possibly an understatement.
Okay. Chair, can I add another comment to that? I think Paul also says, Paul also says in the report that there's a lack of trust has led to a lack of progress. I'm not sure if those are the exact words, but
yeah, those are those exact words. Yeah.
And again, I think there is a very important issue there for us all to consider, not just elected representatives, but anybody in a civic leadership position around trust issues and delivering change. And I also say, with a real amount of respect to everybody involved in political life, because I think there has been some incredibly positive and good political leadership right across the community over the last number of years in Northern Ireland with all parties. That making a political deal is one thing and a huge achievement, as it was in '98 and in subsequent years. But the more difficult and complex and challenging work is building peace on the ground. Beyond the political agreement. And I think we need to, as a whole, acknowledge the need that there is within communities to build the peace. I think that is affected by perceptions of a lack of trust or delivery, and trust in institutions, and not just the Assembly, but in other institutions too. And we need to properly support that work on the ground. And it does come back a little bit to resourcing, but it also comes back to just understanding and walking with those people who do that peace building work, sometimes at personal risk, certainly with degrees of community risk.
And the report also makes an interesting key comment as well. No one picks up the tab. It references a disconnect between taking responsibility for actions, as my interpretation. It makes reference to the fact that the marching season cost 18.5 million in additional policing costs in 2013, compared with 4.1 million the previous year, and yet budgetary reductions in education and health continue to be of serious concern to people in the wider community. Is there any comment or direction in relation to that finding as well?
Well, I mean, that's a generalisation, and it's based on a number of specific things. I mean, the one you referenced, Chair, where, yes, policing costs have spiralled enormously, really, last year, up to, 18.5 million additional. And occasionally what you will hear in the media are statements either from the police or from local traders that public disturbances or public disorder is creating this problem. And when the figures are used, it's as if those who are responsible, if they heard them, might desist. But that is not the case, because the costs don't return to the people who may be the principal actors. The costs return to the society as a whole. Now, if you look at situations where people have had to try to make policy interventions to deal with this kind of problem, like, for example, in the 1980s, when English football hooliganism was a serious problem, whenever football clubs were actually made responsible for the policing costs associated with the fans' behaviour, it radically changed the culture. We don't have that level of problem any longer with the English soccer clubs. It's not always as simple as that, but certainly there is a problem here of a disconnect between the way I put it in the report, those who have to kind of pick up the tab, i.e. the society as a whole, and those who might otherwise be deemed responsible. And when I talk about the cost, it's not all just financial cost. If we stay on the policing issue, I mean, we'd 680 police physically injured last year. That's 1 in 10 of the workforce. And what would strike me about that is the fact that people in Northern Ireland seem to accept that simply as the new normal. That's the reality. That's not a matter for comment. Whereas, of course, in any other society, if you had 1 in 10 of the police force being injured each year, that would be thought to be quite remarkable. And I think sometimes, and maybe this is the value of doing this report as an annual sort of health check, sometimes you have to step back and say, well, can we continue like this? Is this a reasonable way to proceed? And so the generalisation about no one picking up the tab is also about what the promise of devolution was, that under a devolved administration, this kind of decision making, this making decisions and living with the consequences would be brought closer to the people, and that does not appear to have happened.
The report says that the police have become human shock absorbers for failures elsewhere, and that a cultural war is being talked into existence. It cites some data around significant investment being made in and grant aid for the Orange Order, Apprentice Boys, marches and bands on the increase. Could you elaborate on those particular comments?
Yes, taking them in turn. I mean, the one about the police becoming the human shock absorbers is the one, I suppose, that I've dealt with there, that in a way, whenever we put our police force in the front line like that and ask them to deal with the problem, don't we sometimes have to ask ourselves, could that problem not have been dealt with somewhere further up the line, so that it doesn't end up with a line of men between two sort of communities, which is how the way it has become. In relation to the culture war, it does seem to me, and I use this phrase that talked into existence, that we don't need to talk about culture and war in the same sentence. I mean, I don't see that there is any particular threat to British or Orange culture in Northern Ireland in this period, in that the number of Orange marches is larger, actually, than it has ever been. We have more marches last year than we've ever had in the history of marches. The way in which grants have been given to promote Orange culture through Orange Museums, Workhouse received a very large SEUPB grant, the Apprentice Boys in Derry, receiving very large grants for the museum and the interpretive centre. I think people should take encouragement from those. I mean, those are intended to provide encouragement to people that their culture is not being threatened, and I would like to see people take that encouragement. I mean, Europe has been remarkably generous in relation to Northern Ireland, and some of those grants we're talking about are, you know, in the case of the grants to the Orange Order Schomburg House, you know, you're talking about over £3 million to see them in Derry. You know, these are considerable amounts of money, and I think people should take encouragement from that. And I think when we look at, let me go back to the example I gave before of what happened during the year of the City of Culture. Culture was seen then to be a unifying force. And so when people use the phrase culture war, my worry about that is if you keep using a phrase like that, it almost takes on a reality as if this thing existed. I don't think we need to see there being a culture war as being the reality. I think people could possibly look down the other end of the telescope and see that there's lots of support for cultural activities on both sides.
Okay. There are one or two issues that I'm keen to return to, but keen to bring members in as well, obviously. Leslie Cree.
Thanks, Chair.
Yep.
First of all, confess that I've only read this report once. There's quite a lot in it, but I did have, and still do have, some concerns about some of the detail in the report. And as you know, detail is very important. But if I can just maybe give you 3 examples from the first section, the sense of safety. On page 42, you talk about the lawless paramilitaries. And in the 3rd paragraph, you're making the point here really about the respectability. And in the 3rd paragraph you say, this new respectability allowed the PSNI to include those publicly associated with paramilitarism to join them in the sessions of the Cardiff Group. What evidence have you for that statement?
Oh, just only the membership of those who went on the seminar that took place in Cardiff, and subsequently that there were people associated with paramilitary organisations.
Do you think that gave them respectability then? Small number that happened to be there?
I think it does, yes. I mean, I think if they are involved with well, the groups who are listed here, academics, politicians, civil servants and community leaders, I think that does tend to see them as, it does tend to give them a legitimation, yes.
Well, if I could take you on then to the end of that same paragraph. If there is something incongruous about police sitting down with members of illegal organisations to discuss law and order matters, it is an incongruity that has lost its power to surprise because the peace process has long accepted it as a modus operandi. A direct contradiction.
Sorry, why do you see that as contradictory?
Because you're saying here this is a new respectability, and then you're saying in the second part of the same paragraph, this has been going now for a long time and therefore is accepted as a modus operandi. How therefore can it be a new respectability?
Well, I suppose what the essential point being made here is that if we have organisations which are illegal organisations involved in situations where law and order matters are under discussion, there is an obvious sort of contradiction about that, and I think it might surprise outsiders. But the nature of the peace process has been to have a form of dialogue ongoing with people who were involved or are involved in organisations deemed illegal. And it may be the case that in one period that kind of engagement was progressive and necessary for the peace process to work. But if continued for an extended period, it perhaps ceases to be helpful or progressive in that way.
Yes, but also the new respectability sort of pales if it's a modus operandi for a long time?
Well, it's not new that there has been dialogue and discussion with people from paramilitary organisations. We know that this goes back. I mean, the whole peace process in a way was predicated upon that kind of dialogue. But I think there was a different, there was a kind of step change when, for example, when the Unionist Forum was set up and there were members of paramilitary organisations involved in those early discussions, and there was an acceptance of that, and the leadership of the unionist parties at that time said they were quite willing to work with anyone from organisations that have that history, so long as they were working towards peace. The issue, I think, is whether or not those organisations are working towards peace.
We'll probably leave our difference there, I think, Dr. Nolan. But if we move on then to page 44, you're talking here about the size of the PSNI.
Yes.
The thing that startled me about this, this particular section completely ignores pattern.
Oh, well, it does reference pattern. I mean, it goes back to what Patton had said should be the target size for the police force. You know, he had thought that.
Whereabouts would it say the size that Patton gave, the 7,500? Where does it mention that here?
Let me just see if I can find the reference.
You'll find a reference in the top of page 44, but the point is that the comparison...
The Planning Commission had recommended significant downsizing, and the workforce had been reduced from 16,000 in 1999 to just under 7,000 in 2014. Patton tended to use police officers as opposed to total staff as the measure, and the Patton report had recommended 7,500 as the number. And I think, just to give that a little bit of context, the assumption at the time of the Patton report was that we would be living in a peaceful society and that 7,500 would be sufficient.
Well, I was just going to make that point to you, because what he actually said was that it was rash to go much lower unless and until Northern Ireland can be judged with confidence to have become a permanently peaceful society.
Yes.
And yet you're drawing a comparison here with other UK forces and the ROI, which is on a ratio of 1 to 200, whereas Patton was 1 to 220, which actually was based, because I was involved at the time, on New York Police Department figures.
Yeah. Well, I think what I'm arguing here is possibly the same point that you're making, that these were based on the assumption that we would be dealing, the police would be operating in a peaceful context. Now, we're clearly not operating in that context, and what we discovered, particularly last summer, was that we did not have sufficient police to deal with the problems that were manifesting, and because of that, we had to rely upon mutual aid. We had to bring in police from the other police forces in the UK. Now, if that is going to be a recurring problem, do we have sufficient numbers? Is this a realistic total for the police? And what the report is trying to do, and it's done graphically on page 47, it tries to show, look, you have to look not just at the number of police officers, you also have to look at the fact that we had the British Army acting to maintain public order.
Does that mean, Dr. Nolan, you're really arguing for more police?
Well, what I think is pretty obvious is that we did not have sufficient police numbers last year to deal with the problems that presented themselves. What we would hope is that we don't have a continuation of those problems. What we hope is that we can continue with a smaller police force operating in situations that allow for that reduction of numbers. But this is a point the Chief Constable has made repeatedly, that these figures are not realistic to deal with the situation that we find ourselves.
Well, we're agreed on that point then.
Okay.
The third and final one is it's on page 55. We were talking about the historical inquiries team. Now, I really was, I have to say, quite surprised about this. We're talking here about, and again I'll quote, HET, middle of the page, sort of, is it the first line still? Second sentence. In the original plan, it was to work alongside the proposals of the consultative group on the past, otherwise known as Eames Bradley.
Yes.
The historical inquiries team, as you quite correctly say, was set up in 2005, but Eames Bradley wasn't set up until 2007, and in fact didn't produce a report until 2009.
Yes, that's correct. But I mean,
is that not a nonsense?
Well, I don't think so.
Timeline surely proves that, does it not?
No, the context was one where this broader issue of how we deal with the past has been under discussion since 1998. We've had various ideas on how, what structures might facilitate both truth recovery and the interests of justice. And it had never been thought that the HET, when it was first set up, would operate as the sole instrument for dealing with the past, that there would be other accompanying initiatives, and Eames Bradley was set up to try and tell us what they might be.
But Doctor, does that not mean surely then in the original plan it couldn't have been to work alongside the consultative group because it wasn't there?
No, it was to work alongside other societal initiatives to
Well,
deal with the past.
should that be changed then?
Well,
Incorrect?
possibly, yes. We could have made that
It does. It makes it
more
look
clear just in terms of
ridiculous,
sequence. But I do think still the essential point is that when people criticise the HET, they were asking an awful lot of the HET. They were asking it to do things that in the original thinking would have been done through other processes, particularly truth recovery, not associated with justice.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Yep. Jacqueline, you want to come in? Yep.
I wonder, Chair, if I could just say something going back to the very first point in relation to representation, and here take it more from a community relations point of view than directly from the point of view of the report. One of the things that was fed back to us very frequently around the time of the Cardiff discussions was, why are there some people in the room and others not? Now, there's a perfectly logical, practical reason why everyone can't be in the room at one time, but there was a great hunger at local level for people to be engaged in looking at how we could positively come up with solutions to this question of sharing space at all levels of culture. The multi-party talks were then welcomed, I think, because that seemed to be a much more structured approach to this question and a much more broadly inclusive approach to what those solutions might be. Now, we know where the House discussions have got to since then, but certainly one of the things that the Community Relations Council would like to leave in the mind of this committee and others is the need to have, at a societal level, a much more open discussion about how we can find positive ways to share the space when it comes to cultural issues. Last year in Derry, Londonderry was a really very good example of how we can do that, and everybody gets a win out of it. Now, that took work. It didn't, as you'll know as well as I do, that didn't fall out of a clear blue sky, but nevertheless there were very, very important ingredients to that I think we could apply to the broader context, and very, very important to remember. And this is also something that we hear very frequently from the groups that we work with, that the more emphasis that is put on where the problems are, and only where the problems are, the less we tend to pay attention to where there are good examples and lessons that we can learn and apply, and maybe have public policy come in behind that in support of some really good efforts that are going on. So I think the Cardiff thing from a practitioner's point of view was really a matter of saying, how do we all get into an inclusive discussion and find a solution to this so that, there's a more generous and welcoming approach to each other's culture.
I'm not complaining about that. My concern is whenever you go to a lot of work to produce a report like this, with recommendations which deserve to be treated, with the utmost sort of respect, you've got to have the detail of the report being correct.
Yeah.
I was always taught that if you're writing a report, a person from Mars should be able to read that report without applying any local knowledge. So it must be fair and balanced, and above all, it must be accurate. That was my comment. Thank you.
I won't take away from the author's opportunity to answer those questions CRC published.
Did you take my point? If there are some small points,
yes,
and it's easily done,
absolutely,
that are not correct, then that can tend to spoil the effect of the report overall.
Yeah. Wow. One of the things that the advisory group that supports Paul in developing the report said right from the very start was that actually feedback was really, really important. This is a living document. It's produced annually, but actually the information that underpins it is changing day and daily. And accuracy...
Sorry, but the historical information can't change.
No, but...
I'm always cautious of people rewriting history.
Sure, absolutely. But feedback, such as you're giving giving us in terms of being, it's in everybody's interest that we have it as clear, certainly in terms of the evidence, as we possibly can get it to be. And so that sort of feedback is very, very, on accuracy, very, very welcome indeed. But then also on the ideas that are coming through, and Chair, at an earlier point there was some discussion about how did we come up with the index that we used to develop the report. In international terms, this is relatively groundbreaking work. Paul, with some colleagues in Club de Madrid, organised a conference last autumn in November to bring colleagues who are actually working on this kind of peace monitoring process in other parts of the world together to make sure that we were learning from that and making the best effort that we can when we carry out this work. And sparing the author's blushes, there was a very great deal of feedback to say that this is very progressive. There's very little going on in the world that goes beyond what we've got. In fact, other places are wishing to learn from the model we use. It took a very long time to come up with the 4 pillars that are there at the moment, but everybody involved in the process views this as a developing area of expertise for everyone. So any feedback, both in terms of method and in terms of accuracy, is welcome.
But I have to say, in the 5 or 6 days since this report was published, as with the previous 2 reports, all of the feedback we have received has been extremely positive from people about the accuracy, the information, the logic and the consistency within the report.
Is that until today then, Peter?
While Paul, well, I don't think you've raised anything of significance, really. I mean, I understand the points that you've made. You know, while and over the last few days, actually, we have had feedback internationally as well as regionally about how important this is. And it's an example of good practice here that is produced, that we can be reaching out to other communities in conflict and divided situations and demonstrating how best something can be done. So we're very proud of the publication. I think it is important to take the conclusion seriously, because part of the role that Paul has, independently of the Community Relations Council, but also the Community Relations Council has, is to reflect back and challenge in some of these areas. Now, I think we're very happy for that to instill debate, because these are issues where people may have different views. But I think we also have to take what is actually a very substantial piece of work very seriously for that.
Have you seen the new proposed good relations indicators from OFMDFM, and have you responded to the consultation on that? Yes,
Chair, I maybe deal with that. We have indeed. The officials in the department involved a wide range of stakeholders in a series of meetings, and Paul and some of our colleagues in CRC were involved in that process, largely to see where and how the work that was going on in relation to indicators would sit in relation to this sort of work. And they, at the moment, occupy 2 very different spaces. This is, if you like, a sort of state of the nation review of peace building as it stands at the moment. The indicators that are emerging out of the United Communities policy, although they're referred to as the good relations indicators, in fact fall into 2 categories. One is the indicators that relate specifically and very specifically to that particular policy, as opposed to wider good relations in general. And they're also collecting a lot of data that is already available there. When it comes to good relations, we had also said that it will be very important, even if it is narrowly defined under United Communities, to actually follow in the long term the impact of those initiatives to see if they actually do make a difference. So I think we had indicated, while it was this is worthwhile and we were very happy to be involved in the process, there's a long way to go yet to get those to be absolutely perfect. And at the moment they're wrongly named. They really are the United Communities indicators at some level or other, and they certainly don't occupy the space of this report.
But just to be clear, what's your assessment of the current state of the proposed good relations indicators?
Yes, on our feedback was that they are not good relations indicators. They are indicators that relate to this particular policy area, and even at that they lack some of the areas of measurement that would be essential if you were going to review the impact of this particular policy. So the old indicators, as you know, on the one hand, collected data that was already there. On the other hand, there were gaps in the information, and I think those who have devised the current set of indicators would also recognise that that problem remains for the moment anyway.
Would it be possible for you to provide the committee with a copy of your initial comments, Peter, in terms of the strategy in general, and also in terms of the good relations indicators that are being proposed, as you rightly say, Jacqueline, assessing whether or not the strategy actually achieves outcomes is the most important aspect of it, and the indicators are going to be essential to doing that. I'm also keen to touch on present and future funding as well. I've certainly received concerns in relation to the Good Relations Fund. It's my understanding that for financial year 13 to 14, and I can stand corrected, but my understanding that applications for the Good Relations Fund 13 to 14 opened in October, and the OFMDFM Good Relations Fund, and people were notified of the outcome of their applications in February, with 2 months then to deliver projects in that year. And indeed for financial year 14 to 15, applications opened in February and allocations have yet to be made for that financial year as well. Is that information that you're aware of?
The details in relation to 14-15 I would not be so clear on. In relation to 13-14, we did receive feedback from some groups that largely aligns with what you just indicated for year 13-14.
And again, I touched on it because in the role that I have in the last 2 months, I've made an effort to get out and meet with a lot of different groups. And through various conferences and seminars the CRC's run, you have conversations with people. And certainly it's been a recurring theme that organisations are saying, look, we want to do this work. We regard it as hugely important. It is about local people taking risks within their own community for the good of everybody within that community. And we're not being supported by decisions coming quickly to let us get on with it. And I mean, I'm aware of some people saying that we actually had to turn around and turn down the offer because we just couldn't deliver in the time frame that was left and available. And I think there is a wider importance, because as we review community relations funding in general, that review needs to be done systematically. It's a hugely, for me, it's the most important social policy area there is in Northern Ireland. There needs to be confidence about the robustness of that review. It needs to be done with an evidence base, and it also needs to be done mindful of the needs within communities to deliver this work. And therefore, whatever structures or criteria are used in the future need to be responsive to what the needs are in this incredibly complex environment.
Yeah, because we're asking to feed into significant changes, such as Community Relations Council changes and the creation of Quality and Good Relations Commission, in the absence of any information with regards to how they're going to be resourced at this stage, or additionally resourced. Do you know what the timescale for the review of community relation funding is?
Yeah, well, we're told that there'll be 2 stages. The first stage will be, I assume, a very scientific and structured exploration of what has currently been funded across all funders, whether it be OFMDFM, CRC, or a number of the other organisations, including peace funding. That review will be complete by the end of March. I believe it has been completed, but I don't know that for sure because we haven't been formally told. And then the second stage would be by the end of June to look at options for how it could be delivered in the future. It's probably a useful thing to do, but it does need to be done reflective of the seriousness of this issue and a really robust process for doing it, because this is an incredibly complex environment.
I mean, just to return briefly to the administration of the Good Relations Fund for financial year 13 to 14, how extraordinary is that administration, that applications opened in October and people were notified in February?
I don't think we can comment on that because we weren't involved in the decision-making process. I think that's an OFMDFM.
What has been the impact on groups on the ground who are attempting to respond to some of the challenges that this work has outlined. The report, for example, says that there's an impulse for reconciliation remaining strong at grassroots level, and yet OFMDFM Good Relations funding is being opened in October of a financial year and released in February.
Well, I think there's the specific with the groups and there's the broader issue. Specific with the groups, certainly I've been told some of the groups have said no to the offer because they just couldn't deliver in the time frame involved. I think there has been some significant frustration in communities. I've certainly heard it very directly. I know others have as well. And I think that obviously you would want decision making, I would have thought, especially than that, to allow people to get on with the job that they want to deliver on the ground in a very complex and very challenging environment. I think the second and broader issue is this. When you look at some of the targets within TBUC, we would have issues with some. We would actually embrace very strongly others. I mean, some of them are quite ambitious. But like the interface barriers, as I've already said, if you seriously want to take those interface barriers down, within 10 years or even 20 years, you really do need not just to set a target, but identify how you're going to resource the work that's involved, because this really does get to the heart of how we live together within small local communities where the feelings are very intense. It takes a lot of courage to do that work on the ground, but it also requires a lot of support. And if we don't know how that is going to be supported in the medium term, as in 3, 4, 5, 6 year on for the 10-year strategy, then I think that's an issue. But also other funders would look, in terms of other policy areas, at 3, 5 and even up to 7-year funding for programmes. This is an area which will benefit from long-term funding allocation. It's not an area of work that benefits from year to year, hand to foot, if that's the right phrase, hand to mouth sort of funding. Where people don't know this time 6 months whether they're going to get resourced to do the work that they want to do. It's not the right environment to support the sort of work that needs done. It needs long-term commitment, long-term resourcing, and that's one of the principles that we've agreed with the Equality Commission should be in the framework, the legislation, and taking TBUC forward.
Yeah. Alex Atwood.
Thank you very much for the report and for your evidence. Not least because I do think it's clear-headed and forthright character is something that at a political level and at a societal level we just have to come to terms with. And the language that you use about the moral basis for the peace accord has evaporated. Absence of trust, culture war, and so on and so forth. We just really have to acknowledge how our politics has degraded itself, or has been degraded, and how things are deteriorating. But it leads me to the conclusion that it is folly that there should be a transfer of function from your organisation and this new hybrid that has been proposed. Because if the shape of our society is not what it should be, and that all these fault lines that you identify exist and may be deepening, what you actually have to do is intensify the work in the best model. And therefore, I think this actually is evidence against what FM and DFM are proposing in terms of this transfer of functions to a body, and you'll not comment on this, which in my view has lost its way increasingly since the days of Bob Cooper and the FEC, and why you would want to pile in new function to a body that's not fulfilling its function the way that I think, and would actually should look at your report and say, well, what are we doing about young working class Protestant males? What are we doing about it? It's their function to be doing a lot about it. The Equality Commission, I mean. So I actually think that, Chair, this report is actually a commentary upon a emerging field strategy of FM and DFM of transferring function to a body that doesn't do its work, in my view, in the way that it should or had, and in respect of which some of these matters should be taken forward by them. So, and that's a political comment. You might not want to engage with that because you're subject to political authority, and therefore you may not want to comment upon whether you think, in the light of that report and generally, whatever about FM and DFM's ambitions, is what they are proposing the right way to address the fault lines that you identify? And secondly, we were given heaps of reassurance by officials within the last 2 or 3 weeks, Deputy Chair, that the presence of the Chief Executives of the Equality Commission CRC on some working group taking forward the proposed transfer of functions, that this was actually going to fix any problems that might arise. But you've told us today that whilst you may have been at some preparatory meeting, there hasn't even been a meeting yet, or there may have been one where you, working with officials, are taking forward this piece of work. So aside from my policy and political concerns about what is happening, this piece of legislation is meant to come forward pretty quickly now, given the limitations of our mandate, timelines of our mandate. And yet, what we were told by officials, the record will confirm it, was it
26th of
was
March.
Mr. Devitt gave us that reassurance?
That's
right. I'll not make any comment upon that, but that was, again, a very upfront, bullish commitment and comment from Mr. Devitt in relation to where FM and DFM were taking this work forward. Yet we learned today, well, actually, mightn't have been much so far in that regard.
A lot of things to comment on. Let me initially do, and then I'm going to ask Jacqueline to comment on any part of it that you want to, but particularly the second part. Is it the right policy? Can I say one or two things in a context first? And I've been involved with the Community Relations Council in different ways, but as chair of it for 2 or 3 months now. I have to say I think what the Community Relations Council does within a fairly limited budget is very substantial. I think the council, the CRC as a whole, for 20 odd years has made a really significant contribution to how this society works. Has supported a huge number of really very positive activities on the ground, again with some personal and community risk attached with people in the CRC and outside. I think the Community Relations Council over that period of time and now deserves more respect and recognition than it has got for the work that it has delivered. And that doesn't mean to say everybody needs to agree with everything it says or does, but it has played a hugely critical role in the society through the conflict and beyond and afterwards, and continues to do so in terms of challenging in certain respects. That said, I think we approach the proposed legislation without any particular issue of protecting organisations. I don't think that's the right way to go. I think it's about what is the right structure and what are the right policies that we need to address. And out of that will come whatever structure emerges, and it's not about protecting any particular organisation. That's why we would embrace the notion of an Equality and Good Relations Commission, but conditional on certain things, that we get the legislation right and we get the structures right. And I'm not sure if you were here earlier when I went through some key principles that we've agreed with the Equality Commission around long-term commitment, around resourcing, around the equality and good relations function needing enhanced both within a new commission, around the standards set down in international law that we should be reflecting in that. The definition of sectarianism as a subset of racism as well as good relations need to be really robust, and there needs to be more robust enforcement methods in terms of monitoring and regulation. I think those are principles we've agreed with the Equality Commission. I think that means the legislation, we hope, will come forward. And again, this is a time, I think, an opportunity to move forward in some of those areas. So the legislation is going to come forward not saying anything about greater enforcement or regulation, that doesn't have a good, robust definition around those terms, that doesn't actually say something a bit more than good relations is desirable. Good relations and reconciliation in Northern Ireland is a lot more than desirable. It's necessary, and we need to be robust about saying how important that is. And we also shouldn't have legislation that in some way augments processes that undermines equality or that undermines good relations. I mean, and because we're totally committed to equality, totally committed to good relations, and anything that's undermining either of those is not something that we will support. There are a number of areas that we will be looking at in the legislation. So could it be a way forward? It could be, but it does require us to be really robust and ambitious in terms of setting those.
Question on that point. I didn't hear the principles earlier. I welcome the principles. Either FM or DFM or both are not going to agree with those principles, with the ambition, the word that you just used. They're not. You know that, even if you won't say it, but we know that. Because whatever is in there, one or other or both, don't have the ambition. No robust enforcement? Come on. So my question to you is, in the event that your principles that you've agreed with the Equality Commission are not being honoured in the legislation, will you in principle confirm now that you're prepared to say to OFMDFM this does not get us over the wall?
Well, and that brings me into the second point that you raised, and Jacqueline can comment on this as well, and I'll directly answer that question in a second. I just want to be clear with the committee. I mean, my involvement, there was a review done, I think, with OFMDFM that established a transition board. There's been one meeting of that board which I attended, and it dealt with terms of reference. It did not deal with legislation. And the Equality Commission and the Community Relations Council has set up a working group of joint board members to look at what they would like to see in the legislation. That working group has met 3 times. We're due to meet the officials, I think, in a month's time in early May, and that'll be the first engagement of the officials with that working group to talk about the legislation.
Do you know the membership of the working group?
It's 5 board members from CRC, 5 board members from Equality Commission, and the 2 chief executives. So we see that as a process which allows the expertise and specialism within the 2 organisations to help inform the legislation, and that's what we would like to do. We have had little input into the legislation to date. We'd like to have more. I think there's been one meeting where we've been able to say, here's some of the things that we think should go into the legislation. That's it. Now, before that, I think the chief executives had, and another member of staff had, some input into procedural meetings around the establishment of a new commission, but not in terms of legislation or strategy or direction. But I'll leave Jacqueline to comment further on that. The direct answer to your point about when is the time or should we? Well, you know, it is a political decision about what this legislation looks like, and obviously that's for the chamber here and members here to decide on that. I certainly would be publicly saying when I see the legislation, because we haven't seen it yet, if it doesn't meet what we would regard as necessary at this time in our society, set the structures and set the guidelines and the frameworks of what we need in terms of enhancing equality and enhancing good relations, then we'll certainly be saying it publicly.
You would want to answer this question. Do you think that the Equality Commission would be as forthright at that time as the CRC?
Well, that's an issue for them. I know there's very good people in the Equality Commission doing good work, but I think that's a question that you need to address to them.
Can I just perhaps clarify, in relation to the project board, officials in OFMDFM did establish a project board and invited the chairs of the 2 organisations to sit on a transition board, as they refer to it. It got as far as putting together terms of reference and structure documents in terms of how this project would run. At that point in time, OFMDFM carried out what is a conventional review process where they bring an independent reviewer into on projects that they run. I can certainly say that I reported to that reviewer that there was something wrong with the governance structure of the project, in that the boards of the 2 organisations needed to be involved as opposed to the actual staff of the organisations, and that recommendation was taken on board amongst others, and out of that then came a new project board on which the chairs of the 2 organisations sit. There's also legal advisors on that, and obviously officials from the department and special advisors on both sides sit on that as well, and the independent board member of OFMDFM as well as part of that structure. That is different to the structure that Peter is describing, which is a joint meeting of the boards of the two organisations.
That's an initiative of ours.
Yes.
The others is OFMDFM.
Well, you certainly, both at an institutional level and the Equality Commission, seem to be applying your minds to the task. My concern is, and parallel model here, of trying to create a structure that brings together various functions is the VSS. If there's any piece of work that has most preoccupied this committee since last October, it's the VSS. They created a structure and it didn't work, and we'll see if the implementation of the recommendations will make it work better. But the point of it was that if FMDFM don't have a good record of getting right a new body to do vital work in our society, and we know that in this committee from the last 6 months. And whilst I'm sure there's some learning within FM and DFM from that experience, a very senior official in this room told this committee that when it came to the VSS, they applied a lot of effort making sure that they got financial governance right. When it came to governance, financial governance was the one that they just really worked hard at. Yet the VSS, or the review of the VSS by the Victims Commissioner and her team, was withering and explicit in terms of how the financial governance issue hadn't been dealt with. So on one hand, we were told by an official that's the one that we really worked hard at before the VSS was set up, and yet that was the one that the review of the VSS was arguably most withering about. So I just think that we are just going down the dead end here. I don't think the legislation is going to happen in this mandate. I don't think there's enough time. I think the right threshold that you've named is not going to be fulfilled. There's not enough time even to get it achieved. I don't think the will is there anyway. And that it's not a wise course of action, and therefore it would be wiser to actually pull back now and say, what is the right model for dealing with this, informed by your narrative in this third report.
Well, and I'm sure I'm not going to comment on aspects of that. Those are political discussions and political issues. I think our priority is to, embrace what needs to be embraced to get the structures right, because from our perspective, this is the most critical social policy area that we have to deal with. How we live together actually is something that informs how we do everything else in this society. Whether we create sustainable jobs, whether we get people into training, whether we deal with educational disadvantage and improve social cohesion through that, all of that is impacted upon whether we get our good relations, our reconciliation and healing policies right and structures right. So it is critically important from our perspective that we do get it right. We certainly will be doing what we can to inform people what we think, along with the Equality Commission, and I think there will be a degree of consensus between the two organisations about what needs to happen, and we will see what comes through in terms of legislation. If it is right, we'll embrace it and congratulate people. But if there are deficiencies, if the bars aren't high enough, we will say it, because I think what the Peace Monitoring Report brings home, but it's sort of many other reports, and so do our own experiences of things, everybody in this society. I think we all know, I think there is a time to raise the bar and to be ambitious. We certainly have that ambition. We'd urge everyone else to have the same ambition.
Okay. One of the most concerning recent findings was in relation to young people's views in relation to peace in Northern Ireland. Indeed, Belfast Telegraph polled that 65% of young people surveyed did not think that there was peace in the country. Does the Peace Monitoring Report engage with the views of young people, and if so, in what way?
Sorry, excuse me. We took account of all the attitude surveys that had been done, and there were some referred to which were specifically on the interfaces, none on that more general question, do you think peace has been achieved? And that actually was only published by the Belfast Telegraph yesterday, so I'm afraid we were already in print at that stage, Chair. But I mean, it wasn't at all a surprising report, in that it does seem fairly consistent with all the other attitude surveys done by lucid talk for the Telegraph, which show, fairly negative attitudes towards the Assembly, and consistent also with the Northern Ireland Life and Times surveys, which show really a tailing off in the belief that community relations has improved over the last 5 years. We see fewer Protestants and fewer Catholics holding that belief. So some fairly depressing evidence really from the attitude surveys, and the Belfast Telegraph one would just be consistent with all the others that we use here.
Is there work ongoing in the Community Relations Council, or best practice that the Community Relations Council would advise in terms of how we can improve youth engagement on these issues?
Yeah, well, we're involved with young people in lots of levels, and in fact we've also supported this committee, as you know, to have engagement with young people, and we'll continue to do that, and assistance to you in your own work in relation to that remains open, so please feel welcome to come back to us on that. I think this is not a matter of engaging with young people, it's more a matter of them feeling that politics is working. So it's not an issue about whether or not they're engaged with, although that in itself is a very important issue, and very important because they're the leaders of the future. We had a launch of the Peace Monitor yesterday, and one of the speakers at that was commenting on the fact that, 16 years after the actual formal agreement was signed, you've got a whole generation of young people now who have no real history with that, don't remember the roots particularly of where we went before, and that's a very dangerous time because they're able to engage with myths then, not the lived experience of what it was like to be involved in the conflict. So for that generation, the future needs to work, and they need to understand what got us to where we are now, and that's where there needs to be a very great deal more of work, I think.
Let me add a couple of other points. I mean, the Community Relations Council, first of all, and it's not directly answering your question, but it is just something that I think it's important to understand, actually has a very limited budget in terms of its overall work. You'd probably be surprised. I think you have some of the information in front of you around that in the context of others. Apart from supporting work on the ground with groups doing directly that work, the Council would provide an overview around Northern Ireland and support for organisations at a regional level, and would do the sort of things that the Peace Monitoring Report is doing of highlighting issues and challenging and trying to shape policy and practice within government and beyond the public sector as well. I think on the education underachievement thing, there are 2 or 3 conversations that we all need to have, and I would congratulate Paul in stimulating this through the report. I mean, one is, as a society, I think we need to acknowledge and accept there is a big issue here around, for a number of people, around education underachievement. We actually have to say this is a problem. And I'm not sure the narrative around education is more how wonderful the system is sometimes, rather than, while it is very good in many ways, rather than in some cases it's letting a lot of young people down on both sides of the community. I think secondly, we then need to talk about, well, what do you do about that? Well, in other areas, what you do, for example, in England is pay a pupil premium, where there is greater investment to schools that have higher levels of young people coming from areas of social disadvantage. I think we, in some ways, need to get over ourselves and accept that that is one of the responses in policy terms to actually help kids from working class communities in those schools. And the answer isn't just in the schools. Part of it is about the system and the schooling system and the leadership and the unitary nature of how the system responds in different schools. But a large part of it is also beyond the schools, into communities, how families relate within communities and how they relate to supporting their children in schools. It touches on areas of criminality or paramilitarism in some of those communities, as well as a whole range of other social factors. So the debate needs to be had around how we respond, and at the end of the day, part of that will come down to accepting that actually there is a good social policy outcome, which gets back to some of the equality issues and social cohesion issues around investing more money in areas where there is higher level of kids from a socially disadvantaged background.
I agree. We obviously have a number of funding streams coming to an end in the near future. What's the future of the Peace Monitoring Report? Will this be happening again?
The Peace Monitoring Report, as you know, has been supported by the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust and the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and actually this year marks the end of a three-year funding cycle. So we're going to carry out a very quick review of the actual report itself, just make sure there aren't some things that we shouldn't be tweaking at this moment in time. Look at the frequency of the report and some other items, and then we hope to secure funding yet again to continue with the work. We will be looking for other funders, independent funders at that time. So its future, I can't say at this stage, is absolutely secure, but the Community Relations Council is 100% committed to seeing that work continue. It's vital.
And let me say again, just 2 other points in that. I think the Community Relations Council has demonstrated that it produces, obviously with Paul independently doing it so far, extremely robust reports around this. I think the home of doing that in terms of challenge, and I know people may be challenged by the issues, but that is part of the role of the CRC to do that, whether people agree with it or not. It is critically important that that continues to happen in a way that an organisation only like the CRC or a new commission could do. And certainly from our end, there is a real determination to make sure that this carries on. Actually, you're not talking about a huge amount of investment in it. It's a fairly limited amount of money that's needed to make it happen. If I had my way, without prejudging the review, it'll continue to be every year. And actually, we will be putting more resource in, I hope, to be able to have the sort of conversations we're having within communities, because we need to have debate around these issues. That's how we understand some of the issues and move forward within communities.
Bronwyn McGahan, you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. Peter, you just mentioned and put great emphasis on educational underachievement, and rightly so. We recognise that as a problem. But would you also acknowledge that that's why John O'Dowd is using the common funding policy to address that issue? Regarding poverty generally, I live in a rural area. We have issues with the way poverty is measured in rural areas, and I think it's totally unfair. So, obviously that's not covered in your report. I don't think it is. So it's just to flag that up as well.
Well, let me briefly comment, and then Paul can comment on the detail of the report. I certainly understand that the Education Minister has issues around that, around greater investment in areas of disadvantage. I think those are to be welcomed. I think we've asked the Minister if he would like a private briefing around some of the findings of the report, so that we can explore whether CRC has a role in looking at how to, again, communicate some of those issues and develop conversations with some of the key stakeholders around the education side. There are big debates, as you know, and political disagreements around some of this stuff. We're not entering into those political disagreements, but the general principle of where you have kids that are underachieving, does that mean schools need greater investment in those areas? I think the fact is, yes, it does. And that's part of what I'm talking about in sermon. Let's acknowledge the problem, and then we can reach, hopefully, more consensus about how to go about tackling it.
Yeah, well, just 2 points, really. I mean, one is that what we do in this report is provide evidence for what's happening in the society. Then, hopefully, that creates a certain amount of debate about what needs to be done in the future. And yesterday, when we had the seminar to launch it, there was a very interesting discussion. In fact, Professor Tony Gallagher from Queen's was talking on the very issue that you've raised about how do you engineer this to get the right effect? Because sometimes the unintended consequences of some attempts to address this problem actually serve to make the problem worse rather than better. And he was talking about the need to kind of look very carefully at how we construct the models. But where there was agreement in that seminar was that the present system does not appear to be delivering in a fair and equal way for all our children, and that therefore we need new policy initiatives that will deliver better results and help to offset some of the problems that come from socio-economic disadvantage, i.e. if kids from working class areas or from socially deprived as measured by preschool meals, if they are performing as badly as they appear to be, then there needs to be some way in which other resources are directed there. That, I think, was the main point to emerge from the discussion. As regards to the other point about the measurement of poverty, what I've done in each of these 3 reports is looked at all the different measurements of poverty done by DSD, done by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, done by the End Child Poverty Campaign, and so on. And in this year's report, I've got a section that's headed can we trust the poverty statistics? And in many ways, the debates about poverty in Northern Ireland have become debates about method, about how you actually measure it. And you have advocates for particular methods. I happen to think that the one that's most realistic is actually the Family Resources Survey, because that measures real things such as, can you afford, you know, to attend a family wedding? Can you afford to have 1 week's holiday a year, and so on? And those results are actually pretty stark. But no matter what way you measure poverty in Northern Ireland, what's very clear is that the poverty levels here are very serious and do need to be addressed. What I don't get into is what's the correct way to do that. The report simply tries to provide the measures and not rely on any one single measurement system, but say, well, here's the evidence from the DSD Poverty Bulletin, here's the evidence from the Family Resources Survey, here's the evidence from the End Child Poverty Campaign, and so on.
Jacqueline?
Yes, to your point, our work is obviously community relations focused, but we have done work with schools, generally with the support of the International Fund for Ireland in the past. And one of the things that we discovered, the models that were most effective were described as whole school approaches. So you did work in the schools, certainly. You also did work with the families and in the wider community to get a kind of combined effort, a combined result at the end of all of that. And one of the things that came up in the discussion yesterday was that very much the same thing needs to happen when you're looking at educational achievement issues, that schools certainly have a big part to play in it, and making sure that every school is a good school and so on, a very important principle to apply, but that the actual issues themselves, are money on its own will not make the complete difference. There are other issues in there such as you know, ambition, value in education in the first place, role models for young people, support for families that are struggling so that they can support their children through education. All of the issues that you might imagine. So we are strongly in support of a whole school, a whole community approach, if you like, and that now in policy terms argues for a big connection between what happens through the Department of Education with what goes on at other levels in relation to anti-poverty strategies and so on, and that you look for common purpose across them.
I think the example of the North and West Belfast full service community network is based on that whole school approach, and I know that in East Belfast we're looking to see how that whole school model can be applied, even though people argue nothing's been done at all at times. There obviously is quite a lot of work being attempted in the background as well. We're going to have to bring us to a close. Times meetings, George, sorry, you want to come in briefly? Yep.
Just very,
yeah, no problem.
Briefly. Down in the Bavaria at the moment, the two schools sit side by side, you know, the Protestant school, Catholic school. They're now working very closely together. They're actually building a bridge, you know, between the two schools where there's greater workings, you know, from one school to the other, actually. We were over roughly 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it's incredible just the amount of work that is going on, collaborative work between the two schools, and the heads of the both schools, they're practically living in each other's school at the moment. You know, it's so good to see the working relationship. Okay. From such a young age, you know, that is fostered, you know, between the two religions. It's good.
I think that's very encouraging, George. I mean, I'm aware. I'm sure Jacqueline and Paul are as well of that. I think the more that can happen, you know, the more understanding there is without any risk to anybody in terms of the diverse nature of the community there as well. You know, so there's a question of the integration as opposed to the shared, and that's a different debate for a different day, possibly. And can I just, I mean, Community Relations Council also helps with provides an officer for the District Council programme within OFMDFM, and just for the record, can I congratulate Limavady Borough Council, given you mentioned Limavady, for the work that goes on there, because I know there's an awful lot of very positive work. A lot of it very quietly gets done by the council and the officer, and really does make a really significant impact. Again, much greater than the budget. The impact is greater than you would imagine from the budget that they have.
Particularly amongst our young people. It's the young people that you have to keep targeting, bringing along with you.
I would strongly support that. I mean, it is very stark to realise that there are children who are 16, heading towards 17 years old since the agreement. So while we are still working through these very complicated issues, a whole generation of young people have grown up. That's a sobering thought. Exactly. So we should be dealing with that every day and thinking of that every day.
Okay, folks, thanks very much indeed for your time. I think it's a detailed report, and it's clear that it's vital that we continue to have a challenge function on the good relations policy and vision that's set by the government. We've a lot of work to do, and we appreciate the work that you're doing to contribute towards achieving better outcomes in that regard. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee members.
Members, there's quite a few issues coming out of the session there today. Can I propose that we might request a brief in relation to the Good Relations Fund in particular, given some of the issues that have been raised? Would members be content to request that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I also propose, given the scale of the report, that the committee would propose a take note debate in the assembly in relation to the report? How do members feel about that? Agree that? Agreed. Yeah, agreed. Okay.
You'll get divisions, but
okay.
Go ahead.
Chair, did the Deputy Ministers ever come back, the Junior Ministers ever come back on whether they come to the committee more regularly?
Clerk, do we have any update in relation to the frequency of attendance of the Junior Ministers?
Well, we've been in touch with the department about arranging a briefing with OFMDFM in advance of summer recess, so we're working on that. But it hasn't been confirmed.
What is the current frequency of Junior Minister attendance at the committee?
Vague. Very vague.
It's no more than twice
The last time was in
a term. Okay. But we would like to see the Junior Ministers before recess as well then?
Recess?
Summer
Yeah.
recess.
That's July.
Yeah, exactly. That's
They should be here in May. When would they last here? January?
January.
They should be here in May, and we should ask them, to be on this report on a stock-taking discussion in January.
Okay.
In my view.
Okay. So we have the Assembly take note debate request for the Junior Ministers to come to the committee.
Come for, say, 2 hours.
Okay. And we can provide them with a range of issues, good relations obviously being one of them then, yeah. Okay, can I suggest that we also write to the department to request a consultation plan with the Community Relations Council and the Equality Commission in relation to transition? I know, Alex, you raised concerns in relation to how previous project boards and working groups had been handled. If we can get as much detail as possible in terms of the plan for this particular transition then. Members content? Yep. Any other comments or feedback in relation to that? Okay, no problem. Okay then, agenda item 7 then is a briefing from the Northern Ireland Local Government Association on EU issues. NILGA is proposing the establishment of a Northern Ireland Strategic European Partnership panel. At page 252 of your packs is a clerk's brief, followed by a copy of NILGA's outline proposal. Okay. Okay, members, we're delighted to welcome to the committee Alderman Arnold Hatch, President of NILGA, Mr. Derek McCallan, Chief Executive of NILGA, and Dr. Ken Bishop, Head of Programmes, Investment and Partnership at NILGA. You're very welcome, gentlemen. If you want to take 5 minutes to make introductory comments, and then we'll take some questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. We realise we've had a longer session than usual before us, so we will cut to the chase at this meeting. And because you have already seen our initial thoughts, and there may be a few more details to follow in terms of what we see good examples of how this could work and what proposal we want to put to you. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Derek, who will indicate update the local government bill and where we fit into it and how the partnership panel should work.
Thank you, Chair, and again to ensure that we keep to the script and keep it brief. As I'm sure many members are aware, the local government bill was laid in terms of its assembly sessions yesterday and is heading towards royal assent. In our estimation, the local government bill will strengthen democracy here in Northern Ireland, and one of the elements that we have to do is we have to challenge councils to make sure that every element of the local government bill is something that there will be proper scrutiny for, integrated work with the Northern Ireland Assembly, and this is the hub of the matter as regards the Northern Ireland European Strategic Political Partnership. What we're proposing really is a manifestation of the wider political partnership panel as espoused under the Department of the Environment and the local government bill itself. Why? Why? Because about £1 billion of European structural funds will be dispersed in NI during the period 2014 to 20, and what we believe is a manifestation of stronger democracy. This panel can bring together political leadership at both tiers of government to do high-level scrutiny of the disbursement of those funds. It's a significant sum of money spanning multi-departments, and there is a challenge for councils to spend it prudently and innovatively. And we feel, in keeping with precedent in other jurisdictions, that a high-level political partnership panel scrutinised by this committee and by the junior ministers and that key portfolio that this committee has, that would be a good thing. However, it would be churlish of me to say it's a good thing without highlighting the benefits. And again, succinctly, my colleague Ken Bishop wishes to list some of the material benefits of mutual benefit to the committee and the local government sector.
Thank you, Derek, and thank you, Chair. Just to put it in a brief context, what we're proposing here in this panel is there's a precedent of this similar relationship with OFMDFM in the work with the Northern Ireland Strategic Migration Partnership, where the NILGA and the government were approached to host a regional strategic partnership regarding migration on behalf of the Home Office, which has shown already firm results around schemes on the ground regarding community safety initiatives, programmes, education, health, and also programmes within councils regarding sham marriages and also environmental health as well. I'll briefly outline, before I pass to our President, to talk about the structure of the proposal, 4 or 5 overarching benefits of such a cooperation. The first one is an increased investment through cooperation, linking the appropriate Northern Ireland executive investment priorities with the local level community planning could offer a return of around $3 billion in potential joint sub-regional projects. This $3 billion figure was an exercise we recently carried out on European investment opportunities between regional and local government. This represents, if you like, a 1-to-3 return ratio in the local government annual expenditure budget of $1 billion, and what we'd argue certainly by this kind of cooperation on investment, maximising these opportunities, we could bring additional sustainable jobs to the region. We can actually enhance community growth, but also increase local and regional tax revenue returns. The second point is the do with increased policy cooperation and influence. A strategically coordinated approach on a shared EU policy lobbying priorities platform would offer a stronger and more coherent voice for Northern Ireland's representatives in Brussels. For example, the Committee of the Regions, Congress and also in the European Parliament. This partnership would be in a better position not only to maximise and focus on the investment opportunities, but also to protect the Northern Ireland ratepayer against unnecessary financial burdens from new EU policy. The third benefit, as we see it, is on the national, regional and sub-regional coordination of EU structural funds. A strategically coordinated approach to regional and local level EU funding allocation would offer a focused mechanism to coordinate direct investment to those most in need at the right time. In doing so, we would argue, deliver a more efficient means of maximising community and SME support benefit. The fourth point of benefit I want to mention is the increased drawdown of European alternative finance mechanisms and support. A strategic partnership or panel, as we're proposing, would help to utilise and avail of the existing and future European financial mechanisms, which would enable potential increase of additional regional infrastructural and regeneration money to the region, e.g. through maximising local governments' European borrowing powers in partnership with the regional government and the private and community and voluntary sectors. And the final benefit that I want to present is the benefit of the whole regional future planning. What we're proposing, this panel would have an opportunity to offer a regional and local level platform to coordinate and plan focused approach to future relations with Europe. In doing so, better targeting regional and local future investment needs and policy intervention at the time of both of need and of demand. So hopefully I've outlined there for you succinctly 5 distinct benefits, showing that what we're proposing in this panel is not without precedent, and a successful precedent that is too. I now hand over to Nicholas Preston to outline what we're proposing regarding structure.
Thank you very much, Ken. Simon, the structure is laid out in the document that you previously sent, and the key thing is that the governance and accountability.
I think that's page 254 for members of the governance structure there, just so that they have reference to that. All right, no problem.
Yeah, so the overall governance is this committee, as we see this developing. And this structure is very much similar to the precedent that was mentioned earlier as far as the Strategic Migration Partnership was concerned. Then the NILGA executive members would be the local government elected member part of it, feeding into the Northern Ireland European Strategic Partnership chaired by the junior ministers. And that partnership, we're suggesting, could be made up of as far as local government concerned, we have a history of sharing just as the office bearers of NILGA, one from each party. Similarly, we would suggest one from 5 members, one from the 5 main political parties, and that the regional government assembly input would be, membership would include the main EU portfolio ministers, which obviously is DFP, DARD, DETI and DEL. And then we have the EU practitioners doing the work with a joint secretariat of OFMDFM and NILGA. This would, supporting that proposition, we would seek that secretariat to be shared between the association and OFM, building on the work in other areas such as waste with the DOE, migration, which I've mentioned, and the Home Office, policing and DOJ. It would require modest resources, but as we're suggesting in the recommendation at the end, is that if the committee were of a mind to approve the proposal for the Northern Ireland Strategic European Partnership panel and work with NILGA in order to allocate an appropriate budget to carry that out, we would think it would be fairly minimalistic, and we would like to consider that. Do you want to take it a bit further, Derek, in terms of
No, I
finance?
just want to go back to the earlier comment, is that strengthening democracy here is important, and it has to affect real people, local people, and European money will be a tremendous opportunity in a challenging, austere financial environment when rates will be acutely looked at and there won't be many increases and the exchequer budget is going down. So to sweat the asset of the European Union and to have the more attractive figures of per capita gain in the Republic of Ireland of £88 per head as opposed to £33 per head here, I think we have a two-tier policy scrutiny rule, and we're simply drawing attention, having discussed it initially with the chair of your committee, chair of the day, and put the proposal together in good faith.
Okay, thanks very much, Gentlemen, I think everybody would agree that we need to maximise our coordination in terms of drawing down of European funds and our maximisation of them when we do manage to draw them down as well. How do you see the proposal fitting in with some of the existing fora? For example, you have the European Regional Forum, co-chaired OFMDFM and Belfast City Council. Obviously, we have a European panel gathered by the committee as well, and you have the Special EU Programmes body obviously as well. Where do you see those types of existing fora fitting in?
Well, I think the Northern Ireland European Forum we would support. Indeed, I'm a member of the planning group associated with that. The last meeting of that is something like 85 social economy, citizens' advice and related SME organisations. So operationally at local level, they're looking for that menu of funding. What we're suggesting is this high-level political body can actually provide some direction, some framework. It actually puts elected members at both tiers of government into a policy guidance mode. So that could feed, if you will, Chairperson, that could feed the operational work of the forum. In regard to your point about the SEUPB, as of course every member here knows that is a managing authority, one of the issues that we've had been somewhat exercised by is that at bodies such as a consultative partnership, you're quite right to draw attention to the number of partnerships and panels. My point is that they all have to be rational, rationalised and productive, is that consultative partnership tends to be a report mechanism where papers are offered sometimes heavy in weight to elected members who, despite good briefings and good articulation of points, are really getting down to the technical detail. However, post-Barroso, what I'm suggesting is that this panel could actually have a high-level political scrutiny and directional role. So therefore, it would complement with an E some of the existing structures, which must themselves be subject to review and rationalisation anyway. And really, the strengthening aspect of this is that it does offer elected members at both tiers of government an opportunity to shape budget and direction and policy framework. So I see it as a complementary role, mindful, however, of your key point there, that there are perhaps a number of tectonic plates, structures which are all bubbling around one another. And that was the very reason we thought the political leadership was needed to actually give some better direction to the deployment of European funding.
Okay, and have you discussed these proposals with OFMDFM and the junior ministers?
We have not discussed. We've come to the committee first because of the governance primacy of your good selves, but in regard to some of the work that's been done at complementary level, and by that I mean, for example, the strategic migration partnership referred to by my colleague Ken Bishop, the junior ministers have been advocates of that cross-cutting migration rule, which actually led us to believe that the OFMDFM committee could have perhaps a primacy of oversight on this matter as well. Because my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the junior ministers are also scrutinised by this committee.
Correct, yeah. And I mean, suppose in particular resource implications, do you see OFMDFM as being a potential funder in relation to the structure as well?
Well, again, I mean, when the President referred to modest, we were looking at perhaps trialling this. This is about the collation of people and information, so there wouldn't necessarily be an HR cost. It would be more maybe a meeting and administrative cost of, the order of 8,000 to 10,000 indicatively. Short answer to your question is yes. You yourself, Chairperson, have highlighted the significant and positive support you've given the European Forum. This is a political, smaller version of SAME. But we would be hoping to provide cooperative investment as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and what are your next steps then?
Well, as our President suggested, if perhaps, and again conscious of the weighty agenda you have today, we were looking to, subject obviously to hopefully constructive criticism from around the table, have this principle established so that we could go and work up beyond the political imperative and the social imperative, perhaps a modest business case for this, and to bring it back to this committee and the local government sector. that was our thinking.
I think it would be important for the committee to hear the response of the department and the ministers. Are you're intended to meet with the department and the ministers then, or request an opportunity so to do? Yeah. Okay.
Oh yes, I think it's important that we do that, but that will come to you first.
No, I appreciate it, absolutely. Maybe that's a point where we can come back together again once you've had those engagements as well. Bring Alex Atwood in.
Yeah, like my sense behind the paper is probably a frustration that at a local government level, getting things over the line when it comes to European funding and getting a hearing in central government about where European funding needs to go in the local government sector. I think the proposal is one of frustration that things are getting stuck. I'll come back to that in a second. And that it seems to me you're trying to shape a model that galvanises the issue as local government people see it. I might be wrong about this. As local government people see it, because of frustrations elsewhere. So I share with the frustrations if that's what the case is, and I agree with you in the need for coherence and coordination and so on, if that's what you're saying the need is, and there's a need for strategic direction, and I would agree with you in all of that. I'd be a wee bit cautious about whether this is the right model or not. My own sense is that we probably need a European committee of the Assembly if we're going to do this properly, because what you're trying to do is create another process where there's a lot of processes in place, and use some authority out of the committee to move things forward. And I have a slight sense that it'll all end up being fragmented more rather than more strategic. I might be wrong about that because I need to think about it. So I think your intention is right, and your frustrations, if that is the case, are genuine. But I'm not sure if this is the right model to take it forward. But in trying to understand that, is there a parallel model to this, or what are the models in England and Scotland in terms of strategic approach to at a local council level? Because that's what we're talking about. How does councils draw down, maximise the funding? So we see the University of Ulster draw down whatever from the European Investment Bank in the last few weeks. Is it not the case that there were other proposals coming forward from the local government sector to draw down from the EIB? And where are they? Are they stuck in DFP?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why we thought the structure was probably a better one, in that there would be a bit more weight and coordination in terms of priorities, etc. And I don't think this has been born out of frustration. I think it's looking at a way forward to maximise the benefits of EU funding. And I would think that whenever you have a body speaking as one body in partnership with yourselves, in terms of an EU committee of the Assembly, that wouldn't be a partnership. That's EU committee. You quite free to have as many committees as you like, but I think that that would exclude the local council representation and feed into and be partners with an EU committee, Assembly committee.
Just to help to answer the representative's question, a model exists in Wales called the Partnership Council for Wales. Now, the word council is a misnomer because that actually represents a two-tier body with AMs and local councillors. That's coordinated by the Welsh Local Government Association, and it's a direct derivative of the Local Government Act over there, which is about reinforcing policy-level cooperation between central and local. That has a group which is dealing entirely with European monies, and I say monies rather than just structural funds, because the representative also highlighted, if I'm correct, the distinctive opportunities existing from European Investment Bank. our new councils will have an opportunity to cooperate with regional government on issues of regional infrastructure significance. Our concentration in this model was to perhaps do in Northern Ireland what we have to do is to take small steps at a time. So we were just concentrating on the structural funds, but it's quite right to look at the wider picture and the opportunity and challenge for local government to unlock some of this money in partnership with the Assembly. But I hope that's provided an example of an illustrative model in a neighbouring jurisdiction. But it was just to support the comments made by our President.
Okay. Leslie?
Yeah, thanks very much, gentlemen. I also share your frustration. In fact, we had a take-note debate this week on European priorities. I don't know whether you had opportunity of either hearing about it or listening to it or whatever. But if you look at our performance under Framework 7, you know, it was pitiful. So certainly something needs to be done. However, having said that, I'm not sure just exactly what to do. I like the sound of the Welsh model. But you mentioned here the junior and the two junior ministers. We have I suppose it's called a healthy tension with them. You know, because we don't always see eye to eye. In fact, as we try to hold the department itself to account. I don't know. I'd be interested just again to hear what OFMDFM say about it, what their response might be. But certainly you've identified, I believe, a real need to get main players in, you know, for what arguably is the last tranche, you know, of European monies. And if you look at the 2020, you know, there's a budget there of some 80 billion.
Overall, yeah.
A lot of money in there. And we need to do something. Certainly we have to do better. Like the old school report must do better this time.
Yes, Chairman. We understand, that's why I referred to the tectonic plates. There is tension everywhere, and as an apolitical organisation, we're looking to improve and create opportunities for our sector. The money that you referred to and the frustration that a previous representative referred to, I think if you look at those two things together, there are currently in Northern Ireland 5 managing authorities overseeing the audit and disbursement of those funds. In Wales, there is one, and I don't unfortunately have the exact recipe for this, but I think the principles that we've put forward is we need to sweat the asset better in what's going to be the last significant structural fund period for this region up to 2020. And we offer perhaps not all the answers, but we're offering the challenge that we wish to legitimately and on behalf of the sector cooperate with you to improve the disbursement of EU funds. And we will take your recommendation that we communicate also, Mr. Chairman, with the Department and the junior ministers, because we should really be doing all of this in an integrated way.
Yeah. The only thing is the actual sequencing, Chair, probably it's better to get the response from OFMDFM first, I think, you know, to see how they're going to react to that, and then we can move forward.
I think they have a central role to play, obviously, so I think it is important to get a response from the Department and the Ministers, and by all means for us to then reconnect at that point. If you're content with that approach, gentlemen. Yep.
Oh, absolutely.
Chair, just
yep. George, go ahead.
As the 3 MEPs, have they any role to play? What your proposals are?
We had the good fortune in October 2011 of highlighting not this particular architecture, but the very issue that the representative raised, Chairperson, and they at that particular time were perhaps more exercised than we thought they were about this. So I think that they consistently asked for getting a reaction and a solution. So they all three. We've also got their support for Northern Ireland through Invest Northern Ireland, and they'll get to apply for the European Entrepreneurial Region Award in 2015. And whilst I can't confirm the outcome of the shortlisting exercise, we thought that that was another example that when we work together on behalf of enterprise in Northern Ireland, we're making the right noises in places where enterprise comes from, which includes the European Union.
Okay. Gentlemen, if you can take that forward in terms of speaking to the department and reconnect. Our clerk will be delighted to take this back up with you again. Very grateful for your time today and your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members.
Okay, members, agenda item 8 is our draft forward work programme. At page 322 of your packs is a copy of the forward work programme through to the end of the session. Do members have any comments on the forward work programme? I'll also ask members to note that we have to confirm, as was proposed at the committee last week by the Chair, to cancel the meeting on the 21st of May and defer any business schedule for that meeting to the week thereafter. Members content with those proposals?
Yep.
Agreed. Okay. Agenda item 9 then is any other business. I've been asked to remind you to switch on your tablets periodically over Easter recess, which will allow any updates to take place and help prevent members experiencing delays when using your tablets after recess. Public service announcement over any other business. I'd neglected to follow up the particular issue of the educational underachievement that was raised by the Peace report. Would it be worth writing to the Education Committee to request what, if any, work they're doing in relation to that particular issue? Obviously, a number of different reports have been written in relation to that issue, and some work has been done and methods proposed and debated at the Assembly, but I think it would be worthwhile hearing whether the Education Committee has undertaken any particular work in relation to it, perhaps to think whether this committee should be doing anything given the wider social disadvantage that goes into leading to educational disadvantage. Is that, members agreed if we write to the committee? Okay, no problem. Okay. The Chair has proposed that the committee considers undertaking a piece of work in partnership with the Committee on Culture, Arts and Leisure around the portrayal of young people in the media. Are members content we write to the CAL Committee to formally seek their agreement, and that the clerks begin work together to scope out what we might be able to do in relation to this issue?
Agreed.
Agreed, okay. Okay then, I propose that we move into closed session to consider the sections of the committee's draft NIPSO bill and ask that the public gallery be cleared at this point.